NFL Week 12 is almost in the books, so once again, it's time to celebrate ourselves some fancy heroes and fancy zeros.
Fantasy Heroes.
Do I one day know about how Robinson makes big plays? Just ask the Lions defense as he squashed them on his way to 156 yards and a touchdown.
George Pickens depart the Eagles defense and put up another big week, a definite contender for value pick of the season.
People tried to shame us for banging the drum for James, but even in defeat, Winston put up QB1 numbers, obviously with the obligatory interception.
No Jacobs, no problems. Emmanuel Wilson got the job done again with 107 yards and 2 touchdowns.
We'd be lying if we said we were surprised that Jahmyr Gibbs did the business again in Week 12. What we didn't expect is both the biggest fantasy score of the season and also of his career.
Nobody told Tennessee to tighten up on defense, and that led to Jackson Smith-Njigba putting up big numbers yet again as he registered his 7th top 10 week in a row and looks nailed on for the wide receiver 1 overall on the season. We will be mentioning Mr. Smith-Njigba and Mr. Gibbs, but some monster games. But Ed, before we have any more positivity, I feel we should get just a little bit negative once more.
Fantasy Zeros.
If you were banking on Kyren Williams to win your matchup, then you're in a luck, thanks to the Bucks.
Back-to-back 6-point fantasy scores for Lamar Jackson. He needs to stop this because it's really hard to make a pun out of his name.
Less than 1 fancy point, DeAndre. A swift apologies in order, or the punishment will be lines. I must get more fancy points. Times 100, please.
Stephon Diggs is going to need a very big spade to dig himself out of this hole. You had the Bengals and managed just 2 receptions, really?
It won't take you long to batter Snuck Jordan's Week 12 fantasy score. 0. Very fitting for this feature.
Not to feel left out, Jameson Williams joins Jordan with a big fat 0. Only a drop of the hard stuff will make his managers feel any better about such a return.
Yeah, cheers, Jameson.
Thanks a lot.
Loads of fantastic games on the Week 12 slate and a very exciting end to Red Zone this week with so many games really going down to the wire, including, Ed, your game of the week.
Yeah, I couldn't look anywhere else. An absolutely cracking game, and credit to the Giants for making it so competitive. I don't think they were expected to. They'll probably feel like they let it slip after making such a strong start. Have we mentioned how much we love Jameis Winston? I'm not sure if we've picked up on that at all. Once or twice.
To watch.
I just love his stat line. He had a 50% completion rate, but averaged over 20 yards per reception, 3 touchdowns plus an interception. Is exactly what we want from him. I mean, the shame is that Jackson Dart's going to be back in as soon as he's ready. I mean, that's not a bad thing because we love Jackson Dart too. But yeah, it's a shame we only get a little bit of Jameson this season. Solid from Goff from a fantasy perspective, QB9 on the week. But I think he would have expected more. And I think his managers would have done against that Giants defense. He racked up about 18-ish points. I don't really know what to say about Jahmyr Gibbs. Just absolutely ridiculous. The highest score of the fantasy season, as we mentioned in Heroes, was it 55 points, something like that? Absolutely insane. But he is, as are the top running backs, like Bijan, like JT, capable of an absolutely mammoth score because he's so heavily involved in the receiving game as well. So I think that's what really boosts Jahmyr Gibbs at times. RB3 on the season. As for Knuckles, Monty, not quite hit the heights of last season, and his recent run of form probably explains why he's not being started in over a quarter of leagues. He hasn't broken 11 fantasy points since week 5, Monty. But there's still, I think people are still hoping for that big score. Doesn't look like it's coming. He's one you seriously need to think about benching, depending on who the opposition is. Tracy and Singletary shared the rushing workload, but Tracy got involved in the receiving game to make his fantasy score much more respectable. Wan'Dale Robinson is wide receiver 10. I repeat, Wan'Dale Robinson is wide receiver 10. That's really crept up on me. Has it crept up on you?
Yeah. He's just been out there all the time. I suppose that's what it is, isn't it? We say this when you get to that. There's sort of an area where, as long as you're playing every game, you're in the mix, aren't you?
Yeah, he's a legitimate threat, and he should be starting in all leagues now. He's currently only being started in 65% of leagues. That needs to go up. Isaiah Hodgins, he had 6 targets. He's had 6 targets in consecutive weeks and might be entering flex consideration. We thought it was on the cards, and Amon-Ra was ready for a big week. He got his highest fantasy score since week 2. Similar targets to last week. He just caught a lot more of them this week, hence the higher fantasy score. And after a great run of form, that Jameson Williams performance came from absolutely nowhere, just inexplicably blanked as he failed to haul in any of his 3 targets. Just a blip, you'd hope so, but one to keep an eye on. Theo Johnson is another giant who slipped under the radar. He's tight end 10 on the season, surely moving into must-start territory, yet he's been started in 27% of leagues, which doesn't make sense to me. Brock Wright, more involved, as you'd expect in Sam Laporta's absence, but he failed to make an impact from a fantasy perspective, as Gibbs and Amon-Ra accounted for 20 of the 28 completions. That doesn't leave much else to be shared around with everyone else.
No, and it's just such an exciting into the game. You're right, Theo Johnson, he is going to be on the radar, but he's a player we've mentioned quite a lot because of how much he's been relied upon as well. And just that Jameis Winston performance, it was just classic Jameis Winston.
Just what we want from him.
A couple of absolute bombs and then just a nonsensical. Why have you thrown that interception? Not quite as bad as Joe Flacco's.
That was my favourite. That was my absolute favourite.
My game of the week is one that the scoreline definitely flatters what we saw, and that's Titans Seahawks. It wasn't anywhere near as close as the scoreline would suggest.
Well, Red Zone had forgotten about this, and it was almost they were like, oh, this might be turning into a game. Sorry, we'd forgotten about it.
Another game.
Yeah,
but Seahawks they did walk away with it, really. It was never really in doubt, I don't think. The reason I've chosen this is because there are so many things that I find quite interesting from a fantasy point of view about certain players we've not really spoken about. I mean, JSN, for starters, we've not spoken about him a huge amount, and he has solidly worked his way to the wide receiver 1 overall. He scored in this matchup more fantasy points than all other Seahawks running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends together. JSN got 37.1. Everyone else got 32.80. Is the fantasy wide receiver 1? Is he the best receiver in the league right now? So, 313 yards first and 259 ahead of George Pickens in second place. I want to stop there. George Pickens in second place. We owe him an apology from preseason.
We do.
80 receptions, tied first with McBride and Nakua. 7 touchdowns, tied 4th place. He's my number 1. I think he's everyone's, isn't he, at this stage?
He's definitely fantasy number 1. Yeah, I mean, whether he's the best receiver is a different conversation, I suppose. He's in a great situation, a great vein of form, great fitness. That all helps, doesn't it? A quarterback that he's got a great relationship with. So yeah, he's having a phenomenal season. We thought something was on the cards, but not quite this.
Walker and Charbonnet, so it gets a bit more negative from here on in. They're both proven to be flex at best, but Walker was being drafted as a higher end RB2. Already, I'm starting to it gets to this age, I start to think of next season as well at this point and kind of where what we're seeing now, how that might manifest next year. I don't think either will be on my radar at all next season. I honestly don't think I'd even consider till like round 10 because even though they get that flex value, they're just not consistent enough. Both have had weeks completely out of fantasy relevance as well. So, yeah, a real concern there from a fantasy perspective, but Seahawks don't care. They're getting the rushing yards when they need them, but split between 2 of them. I think it's just the share is so close, it damages both of them from a fantasy point of view. Cooper Kupp, done. He's now unplayable in fantasy, still starting 27% of leagues this week. They've got Minnesota the next week. That should be 0. Let's be completely frank with that. Rashid Shaheed as well. He just gets no work. His last game in New Orleans, he had 9 targets and 5 receptions, and he averaged 5 receptions per game through those 9 games. His first 3 games with Seattle, 8 targets, 3 receptions over 3 games. That's not the role I think he thought he was coming into. And then Sam Darnold. So, no, not his greatest week, but still worthwhile. If you start him, you're not completely devastated. His 17 points is all right. My question is, I suppose, Ed, would you be happy with him as your QB2 in Superflex or your bench QB in your Dynasty League? Is that what he is for fantasy right now? Or would you be worried if you had him as one of your quarterbacks in Dynasty?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly wouldn't want him as QB1 in Dynasty, but as a backup, yeah, I suppose so. He's just not consistent, is he, Darnold? He does have those down weeks, so I suppose that's what a bench QB is. You know, you look to slot them in when maybe they've got a great matchup and your top quarterback hasn't. So yeah, I guess that's what he is. I don't think he's any more than that.
So 5 top 12 weeks, 4 weeks outside the top 24. It's that inconsistency that damages it. I do think it'll be interesting to see what he does next season. I'm very interested already for next season in Cam Ward, though. So his first fantasy relevant game, his first top 12 finish, lots of garbage time points. So let's be frank about that. I doubt he'll be widely drafted next year. Was this just a flash in the pan, this game? Based on the glimmers of what we've seen, actually, some of the plays that we saw yesterday and in recent weeks, I don't think so. I think he's showing some clear progression at the minute. And once again, let's be honest, everything around him is absolutely horrible. Like, is it any wonder he's not kind of far? Who would you rather have, Cam Ward or Sam Darnold, if you were relying on a dynasty QB for next year?
That's difficult. I mean, you know, Cam Ward, he does remind me of Bryce Young, and Bryce Young's hardly setting things alight, is he, in his second year, in his sophomore year? So that's tough. I know you're not a big fan of Darnold, but I think I'd probably be edging towards Darnold. I'm yet to be sold on Cam Ward yet. I agree. He's got no weapons, and it'll be interesting to see what the Titans do in the draft, because they'll have another high pick, won't they? Will they get him some more weapons? I don't know.
So that's what I've kind of said. I think based on his glimmers, I think we just need to see something else for him, don't we, at this point? We need to see a top wide receiver. Probably, I don't think that's necessarily a draft. I think they could always find an established wide receiver who can help to bring him along as well, really. That said, DK and Restrepo show promise. He could do with that established. For me, speaking with Restrepo, he got his first targets and first 2 receptions. So Ward's buddy from Miami could be a useful target for him moving forwards. There's been a lot of rumblings about he should be getting some game time, and he's made a decent start with his first targets yesterday. Tony Pollard, drafted as low-end RB2, touted as a potential value pick. No top 12 games, 3 top 24 games, only 3 games with more than 10 points. I think you're right. He's in the bust conversation, isn't he, this
Big
season?
time, yeah, he's had a shocker.
RB29 on the season feels like it flatters him a little bit as well at the moment, and he looks set to miss out on 1,000 yards after 3 back-to-back seasons with 1,000 plus. Finally, I'm going to take a little victory lap. Gunnar Helm, 2% rostered, was on one of my streaming tight ends of the week, and he was the tight end 7. You are welcome. Jacksonville next, so I get a feeling he will be mentioned once again on Friday as a possible streaming option. Any other talking points you want to mention from week 12, though, Ed?
DJ Moore, I think he's entering fancy gremlin territory. Wide receiver 4, followed by 2 horrible weeks, then wide receiver 7. I mean, when do you start him? He was only started in 41% of the leagues this week. I'm not surprised. It should have been lower. And he goes and gets a score like that this week. Very annoying. Another absolutely horrible game for JJ McCarthy. And I'm going to say now, because there's links to a feature that's coming up later, I don't think he should be anywhere near your fancy starting lineup. You're going to counter that later, so we'll come back to that. I mean, I'm asking the question: do the Vikings persist with him as they're pretty much out of the playoff race, or does he get benched for Carson Wentz? And John Mechie, I'll talk about him on the waiver wire later, but he's had a receiving touchdown in back-to-back weeks, emerging as a very reliable target for the Jets. His targets and receptions both doubled this week, so I thought that was quite interesting. What about you?
So a few things, because a couple of running back things. So Kyle Monaghan, not a huge performance, but whoever's running the commentary just referred to him as a battering ram on the goal line, and that's exactly what he was. He averaged just over 4 yards per carry. No, not phenomenal, but a couple of his carries were close goal line situations, so it brings that average down. I just think it's quite an industrious performance, and I think he could well be in weekly flex consideration. Even with Swift in, he was looking the better running back yesterday. Emmanuel Wilson running the show in Josh Jacobs' absence. I reckon this could be a similar situation. I don't think like Monaghan seems to be showing up Swift to be a bit inefficient, which we've known for the last few years, really. I don't think Emmanuel Wilson will do that to Josh Jacobs by any means, but I don't think Emmanuel Wilson will be a non-entity when Jacobs returns. Slight concern as someone who's got Josh Jacobs in a couple of leagues where I'm pushing for a championship. I'm worried if that might impact his workload a little bit. And then Lamar Jackson. He's in the fancy bus territory at this stage. After a great start, last 2 games have been really poor. And the thing that made him that, for me, the only quarterback last year that was worth drafting. I know Josh Allen put the big numbers at the end of the season, but the separator for Lamar was he was a top 12 quarterback every single week and never, ever let you down. And there's a couple of shockers that will have, if you're relying on, I know sleeper projections to sleeper projections, if you're relying on the 22 points, whatever it says, and you come away with 6, that seriously harmed your kind of lineup this week.
I was looking back over Lamar's performances over the years, and he's never ever had 2 back-to-back weeks like that before, ever. And you know they're both in his bottom 5 or bottom 10 scores ever. So he just doesn't do that, does he? I mean, the Ravens themselves are grinding out results, aren't they? Their defense has woken up, but yeah, the offense looks a bit stodgy, doesn't it?
Yeah, stodgy is a good word. She's been very slow to get going. And I've been looking forward to week 13, the Thanksgiving Day game against the Bengals to absolutely destroy them and make sure the offense is ticking. And the Bengals defense have woken up.
Well, yeah, the defense has been better, yeah.
I started to say, go, brilliant. The Ravens offense is in decline. The Bengals defense has woken up. Goodness knows what happened on Thursday. But we have got our sights firmly set towards playoffs now. I think everyone's in the stage of prioritizing their leagues of most interest. So, Ed, what I've got prepared for us this week is a look ahead to fantasy players who have the easiest playoff schedule. So, week 15 to 17. Those players that are currently available on waivers. I've only selected players that are available in more than 50% of leagues. And none of these are guaranteed successes at all. We've already mentioned your opinion on JJ McCarthy, but they are stashes with potential value to be had in the playoffs. Every season, there's a player or two who exceeds all expectation. Every year, there's a player that if we said now, they're going to get you 15 plus points every week, you go, nah, based on what we've not seen it. And for me, this is completely epitomized by the 2022 season fantasy playoff behemoth that was Jerick McKinnon.
I mean, it was absolutely phenomenal. I mean, if you're new to fantasy, he'd had a roll through the season, as you can see, weeks 1 to 12. You can see he was involved, but he wasn't really fantasy relevant, 6.4 fantasy points per game. But then Clyde Edwards-Helaire was ruled out for the season in week 12, and McKinnon kicked in. I mean, his run through the fantasy playoffs was absolutely insane. I mean, 23.2 fantasy points per game is top 5 running back category, and he'd shown absolutely no indication of that before that. So yeah, I mean, it is the Jerick McKinnon that we're trying to find in this group of players, isn't it?
But it's the fact we've only got one Jerick McKinnon to mention.
Yes.
We have to go back to 22 for that. So all the players here could equally do nothing. If we'd said in week 12, do you know what? Stash Jerick McKinnon, he could win you your league. People go, you're talking absolute rubbish. You don't know. We'd have had all of that. I can remember week 13 where I think we were at a stage where so were loads of people, maybe worth picking up on waivers. We had a decent week. And then week 14 was absolutely spend all of your fab and get Jerick McKinnon. This looks to be like something properly happening. So, as I said, the following are all lower than 50% rostered for 1 QB redraft leagues on Sleeper, and all have week 15 to 17 schedules that are favorable. So, I'm starting with JJ McCarthy, who you've just poo-pooed, 31% rostered. But week 15, he has the Cowboys. giving up the most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks at the moment. Week 16, he has the Giants, giving up the second most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. And then week 17, the Lions, 12th. So, yes, maybe you get to the Lions, you might want to pivot. Who knows what version of the Lions? Maybe that we'll get to a Vikings-Lions 42-all thriller. Who knows? But if you are struggling at quarter, if you're relying on Joey B as to come back and you've been kind of using bit piece here and he doesn't come back fit and flying like we're hoping he does, then you could go to McCarthy. If you've got a quarterback who's got an insanely tough matchup, you might want to pivot. So when you get to the playoffs, you've got a decent roster already, but you can sometimes get there by plugging and playing certain positions in somewhere. And McCarthy could be that player. No, he's not been hugely impressive. But sure, I don't know. For me, there is a route where week 15 against the Cowboys could feel like a breakout of sorts. And all of a sudden, people are kind of buying in a little bit more on JJ McCarthy. If that happens and he's on waivers still then, you can guarantee a lot of fab is being spent for week 16 against the Giants. Have I convinced you at all, Ed?
No, I'm out on JJ McCarthy at the moment. I've seen nothing to suggest that he's capable, even against poor offenses, poor defenses. I think if I was going to go for someone, it would be the next person you've got up, because I think they do have shown flashes and have shown when they turn it on that they can put a decent performance together. So I think mainly because I'd rather go for Tua, who's on the next slide.
So, yeah, next up is Tua, and he is far more widely available. He's only 19% rostered. I think all things considered, his run is probably a little bit more favourable, although he's not got first and second. But what he does have is the Steelers, who are giving the 10th most, the Bengals, the 3rd most, and the Buccaneers giving the 8th most. So, potentially, Tua could steer you through the entire playoffs. I've been dismissed for much of this season, and I feel he has justified that. But such a good QB schedule, you've got to consider it. And that trio of teams is averaging 19.8 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. Keep in mind, Tua doesn't always perform in the situations he should. There are some, like Jared Goff, for example, he's had his ups and downs, but they've been fairly predictable ups and downs based on strength of opponent. Tua doesn't always follow that, and he's had a couple of stinkers in favourable matchups. But if you get to the playoffs, injury hits, and Tua's available, I think you could do worse. And no, I don't need to do too much. Based on what you've heard, I don't need to do too much convincing of you there, do I?
No. I mean, I'm not Tua's biggest fan either. But out of the two, if I was looking for a quarterback, I'd probably be more in on him than JJ McCarthy.
Next up is a player I absolutely love to talk about. So when I saw the schedule, I thought I just had to get me some Mason Taylor. So the earliest Garrett Wilson can return is week 15. And if the Jets are dead and buried by then, will he bother rushing? Probably not. We know that we should be mentioning John Mechie, obviously, and that's why you're going to be mentioning him shortly as well. The reason I've gone for Mason Taylor here is because I think Mechie is going to be above 50% roster by the time we get to a couple of weeks at this rate. But Mason Taylor could give you that edge at a position where you are more likely to be turning to waivers, and that is tight end. So week 15, the Jaguars, second most fantasy points per game to tight ends. Week 16, the Saints, 16th. And then week 17, championship weekend, the Patriots giving up the 8th most. If Taylor turns into a reliable target for Tyrod Taylor, he could present a useful option at tight end. He's had a mixed season so far, but could absolutely end up with a strong finish. So, yeah, Mason Taylor for me is another player in consideration. And I think we've probably seen enough to know he's not going to be getting tight end 1 week in, week out. But I do see a route that he could be around that tight end 6 to 8 during that friendly window. I think we both try to draft early. I think we both got lots of shares of Kittle, Ferguson. That's how we like to play at tight end. But if you were in a tight spot, say Jake Ferguson goes down week 14, is Mason Taylor someone you would consider plugging in?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Taylor. I think he's in a good situation in New York, and he'll get the targets, won't he? I think he has a fairly solid floor. So yeah, he's someone that I'd be happy to plug in.
Next up is a player that is slightly different. So the schedule isn't as favourable here whatsoever. So we're now looking at Brian Robinson Jr. of the 49ers, 35% rostered. So week 15, he's got the Titans, 8th most fantasy points per game to running backs. Week 16, the Colts, 22nd most. So actually doing quite well against running backs. Bears, 15th, so middle of the pack. This, though, is a what if CMC gets injured stash. We know whoever plays as the RB1 in San Francisco has fantasy value. And if CMC did miss time, you can absolutely guarantee that Robinson will be the hottest end of season waiver wire pickup going. I think this week you could get him for 0 fab if you have space to stash him on your bench. Say not the softest schedule, but he could absolutely provide weekly value if he gets a chance. And say CMC goes down next week, what are you spending? All of your fab left if you're a playoff contender. If you've got that space to stash him, he could be a nice free addition this week just to sit and hold on to. I mean, I don't think we get carried away with the injuries in the CMC talk, but he's a running back and running backs frequently get injured and he's not been injured yet this season. So it could be on the cards, couldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, CMC has got that history there. He's looked very, very good this year, obviously, and he's looked healthy, hasn't he? So, Brian Robinson, would come in and do a great job. So, if you do have the luxury of that space on your bench, it could be a sensible thing to do.
Next up, we're going back to the Giants, and I have for you Darius Slayton, who is currently 37% rostered. He didn't do a great deal yesterday. He only got 2 targets, 1 reception, 23 yards, but is coming back off that hamstring injury. And we know he's got that downfield threat in him. So the reason for him is week 15, the Commanders, 4th most fantasy points going to wide receivers. Week 16, the Vikings, bench him if you do have him. They are given the 4th fewest fantasy points going to wide receivers. Week 17, the Raiders, the 2nd most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. Wan'Dale Robinson isn't acquirable in this bracket. That's why I've gone down to Darius Slayton instead. This feels very risky because Wan'Dale Robinson has established himself as the one. But that big playability of Slayton could get you an all right kind of steady load of points in flex, but just feels like he could have that big game in him as well. Absolutely risky. So I know that we're just saying Wan'Dale Robinson is doing big things. Do you think, for me, Slayton is perhaps my riskiest pick of all of these? But would you be tempted, especially in that week 17 game, or is that a bit too rich of a risk to get you a championship?
Yeah, I'd also throw Theo Johnson into the mix, as we mentioned earlier. Yeah. I think both of those, both Robinson and Johnson are very solid and are the leading targets, aren't they? So, but what you say about Slayton is right. He has that big playability, so it's likely that I would say in one of those 3 weeks, probably 15 or 17, he's going to have a big week. It's just difficult to pick which one, and I imagine he'll be anonymous in the other one. He's that type of player, so yeah, that's why it's risky, because I don't see any consistent value there.
And finally, it's always good to throw in a defense, and this is a defense that is a bit of a tough sell based on what we've seen at times this season. The New Orleans Saints.
That's a nice run of games, that is, isn't it?
It really is, isn't it? So when you're looking at how many points these offenses have put up this season, we have the Panthers, the 28th most. That's the 4th fewest. We then have the Jets, 25th most, 7th fewest. Titans, the 32nd most, or in real money, the fewest points up all season. They've only had 4 weeks of plus 8 points, including 21 in week 5 against the Giants. But what a schedule over those 3 weeks. This is one of the few times I would advocate holding a defense on your bench. So I would say maybe pull the trigger on waivers in week 14 if you have space, not at the sacrifice of a player you may need to play during the playoffs. If you've got that space, but week 14, they've got the Buccaneers, so absolutely don't start the Saints in week 14 against the Buccaneers. That would you're not making the playoffs if you're relying on that game. But I do think there's absolutely, or if you are guaranteed your spot in the playoffs, if you've secured the week 15 bye, plug them in for your defense, doesn't matter then. I do think that, and we speak about this every year. If you can, we stream our defenses, it's easy thing to do. But if you could get a defense locked in with that run and the Saints managed to pull through on that, as they should realistically, it makes it one less decision to have to make, isn't it, during your championship campaign?
Yeah, I'm already going. As soon as we finish recording this, I'm going to look at what leagues I need because that run is ridiculous. You'd expect
we should have done this tomorrow after waivers have passed.
Yeah.
I'm just looking back to what they did yesterday. So 12 points yesterday against the Falcons. Once if you could get 10, 12 points guaranteed from your defense through playoffs, you're happy with that. There's the route there to picking up some bigger points as well. Before we move on, though, I do want to just have an honorary mention. The reason I've left my final pick in the honorary mentions, I'm not quite sure which player to say. So that is whoever is going to be the RB1 for the Cardinals through the playoffs. Week 15, not too fussed because they've got the Texans who were giving up the 19th most, so not of great points to running backs at all. But the Cardinals have in week 16 the Falcons, the third most fantasy points per game to running backs. And week 17, the Bengals, the most fantasy points per game to running backs. So Michael Carter, always on of a night, could absolutely be a fantastic pickup at this stage. Trey Benson, if he's back and firing and you've kept him on your IR, that could be fun. It's worth going to have a look for Trey Benson now in case someone has dropped him to make space as well, potentially. But one of those is going to pay you back and then some. I just don't know who, Ed. That's why it didn't serve its own graphic. But I'm assuming you would absolutely back up whoever is the RB1 is definitely going to get lots of points in week 17.
Yeah, like you, I'm not sure who it's going to be. So yeah, it's very difficult.
So please do, if you've not already, take a moment to subscribe, to like, to give us a share. We'll be running every single week our Heroes, Zeros, streaming picks, and a little feature like we have just done today every so often. But Ed, it's time to turn to the waiver wire. And who do you have for us this week? One or two we've kind of mentioned throughout that little run there.
Indeed, yeah. I mean, before I move on to the six I've selected, obviously Emmanuel Wilson, still very hot on the wire after that monster week 12. I noticed he was in every single DFS lineup that I saw. I think everyone picked up on that value. He's still available in a third of leagues, but if Jacobs returns, his fantasy value does drop significantly. Apart from him, there's not it's very bare when it comes to running backs. So we've got a wide receiver and tight end heavy week. Starting off with John Mechie, not got much more to say about him apart from what we said earlier. 8% rostered. I think he's a canny pickup. He's widely available. He's a reliable target for Tyrod Taylor, especially while Garrett Wilson remains sidelined. As we said, that earliest he can come back is week 15. So Mechie is someone I'd be looking to pick up. Similarly, Brenton Strange, the tight end in Jacksonville, been out injured for a while. If I was in need of a tight end, I'd be looking to pick up Strange. Now he's back from injury. I think he's going to be regularly amongst the top 10 tight ends. Currently tight end 4 on the week as it stands. And I think he could be another good pickup. Chimera DK, the wide receiver in Tennessee. Great performance this week. Bounce back performance in week 12 after a disappointing couple of weeks. There's not much else for Cam Ward to throw at, especially with Elikai Amana out. So I think DK as well has decent flex appeal. He'd be someone else I'd be looking to pick up. Moving on, Greg Dortch, 19% rostered, the wide receiver in Arizona. He's come alive the last couple of weeks. Do we have his pick? He deserves a picture, surely, Greg Dortch.
Greg Dortch, sorry. There he is.
There he is. There he is. And he was wide receiver 12 last week, wide receiver 14 this week. MHJ sidelined for a while. He's had an appendicitis tracheotomy. He's had something done to his appendix. Dortch is getting heavily targeted by Brissett. So he's another wide receiver worth a pickup. I think all three of those, Mechie, DK and Dortch, are worth picking up. Colby Parkinson, 1% rostered, not as appealing as Strange, despite a solid couple of weeks. The reason being that Devontae Adams and Puka are just target hogs. So Parkinson's relying on a touchdown to make himself fantasy relevant when he's getting 4 targets on a good week. So I wouldn't be as confident in Colby Parkinson. And finally, it's taken to week 12, but we make our annual mention of Yoshi in this segment. With Higgins out and Burrow back, admittedly, what's probably going to be a very rusty Burrow, Yoshivas is an appealing target on the waiver wire. And I'll mention as well Gesicki. Mike Gesicki, the Titan, may also be someone worth having a look at now. He's back and Burrow's back because, Burrow and Gesicki do link up well. And I imagine Gesicki is available in a high percentage of leagues. So Yoshivas, not as appealing as the other wide receivers, but he might do you a job, especially this week with Higgins confirmed out as he's entered concussion protocol, although Mr. Spit is back.
I had to take Gesicki off a couple of IR spots in leagues and then subsequently dropped him to make space for other players. And the fact that the first few highlights of the Bengals offense was Gesicki getting reception.
Yes.
I messed this right up.
I think, especially with Burrow back, I do think that Gesicki holds some appeal. But I'm not convinced by the Bengals offense have struggled. And Burrow isn't going to come back firing, is he? I don't think. It will take a while, but we'll see.
I very much hope so, as the Ravens play the Bengals this week. We shall be talking about that on the main show, I am sure. Well, that is our rundown through our Week 12 heroes and zeros, some potential high-risk but maybe high-reward picks for your fantasy playoffs and some waiver wire pickups to get you to those playoffs in the first place. I'm quite happy we've said all of the things there. Is there anything you wish to add before we depart?
No, I'll just call the cab, shall I? Malcolm, take us home.
You have been listening to the team from TH Fantasy Football. For more content, follow TH_fantasy_NFL on Twitter and Instagram.